After the strong critical response but tepid sales performance of Psychonauts in 2005, a lot of companies would try to analyze their mistakes, go to focus testing meetings, and try to deliver a more optimized product soon after to recoup their losses. That is what a lesser studio would do. Instead, Double Fine spent the next 4 years developing a semi-satirical love letter to 80s metal music and culture, featuring some of the biggest names in rock history. According to the lead designer Tim Schafer, the idea for Brütal Legend came to him on a bus ride in 1990 while still working at LucasArts, but was also influenced by a meeting that Schafer had had with a roadie of Megadeth's named Tony, who would inspire the game's protagonist. He had always been a big fan of rock and metal music, and when Psychonauts came out, Double Fine were looking for something new to start on. Schafer, remembering his dream over 15 years later, pitched the idea of the game to his team, and they immediately got to work, with a playable character model and driving mechanics worked out within 3 months of beginning development. The game has you take control of Eddie Riggs,
Decapitation!
a disillusioned roadie for the teeny bopper band Cabbage Boy that Eddie finds to be untalented posers. But ever the professional, Riggs constantly espouses the tenets of being a good roadie. Always remember that the main act are the important part, and you're just there to make them look good. One night, an accident causes the band's incredibly elaborate stage props to fall apart, and Eddie is crushed under a giant metal demon effigy. But as his blood touches the buckle on his belt, the statue comes to life, and Eddie is transported to another land where every 80s metal album cover is a tourist destination. Eddie soon meets with a band of rebels who are trying to reclaim the land from the evil Emperor Diviculus. The Evil Army are a band of BDSM-loving demon weirdos who have joined forces with the hair metal militia and the new romantic Drowning Doom, while our super hardcore true metal rebels, the Ironheads, are trying to righteously bring the brutal lands back to the teachings of the old ones who came before. The entire plot is an almost painfully generic fantasy tale, made brilliant by the fact that the drama is constantly being undercut by the absurdity of the setting. And my 15-year-old heavy metal obsessed brain thought that this was the greatest thing since snakebite piercings and skull candy headphones. Memories of the numerous one-liners or riding through this apocalyptic fantasy world with destroy the orcs by 3 inches of blood playing were the things that I remembered fondly. So, 12 years and an entire early adulthood later, has my opinion changed? Before replaying Brütal Legend for the first time in over a decade, my memory of the game was largely positive, with the setting, the star-studded cast, and of course, the humour and tone of the game standing out most. From these fond recollections, I was sure that I loved this game, right? I mean, all of my memories of it, from renting it at the local video store to the time that it had to be returned, were positive. But now, having gone back and played through the entire campaign, spending about 15 hours in the Brütal lands, the truth of the matter is a bit more complicated. Although it launched to a fairly high critical acclaim, currently sitting at an even score of 80 on Metacritic, Brütal Legend has become somewhat lost to time. It's now one of those games that fans will speak highly of, but for most people, it's probably just one of those games that you see in the second-hand section of your local game store with no real knowledge of what it actually is. And until replaying Brütal Legend for this review, I would have counted myself in the first camp quite definitively. A fan who was very quick to sing the praises of this game. So how come it has never reached legendary status despite its quite dedicated cult following? I'm sure we can get to the bottom of it in the next however long this video is going to be. Is it long? I haven't written it yet. This is the intro that I'm writing right now, so I have no idea. Sorry, future me who's editing this! So strap on your 6 strings and turn it up to 11 as we discuss the nostalgia trip that is Brütal Legend. But before we begin, I want to first say a big thank you to all the new people who have subscribed. For those who are unaware, this video is part of a long-term project called the Steam Pilgrimage. The idea is to stop buying games and getting sucked in by key reselling websites and online sales, and finally play and finish every game in my Steam backlog, and of course then make videos and chat with you guys about it. If this is something that you want to tag along for, then maybe consider subscribing, and if you don't want that kind of commitment, but you like the video, a thumbs up or a share is always appreciated. You can also join the Discord server or use the hashtag SteamPilgrimage on social media to share your experiences and start hacking away at that backlog. Brütal legend is nothing if not charming, and just like the sentimentality people have for the game, wanting to return to a bygone time are all themes that are baked into the world itself. Brütal legend is set in the Brütal lands, a time somewhere in Earth's past where it's revealed that all these stuffy, boring religions got the facts of creation a bit wrong. Like all good creation myths, first there was nothing but darkness. But instead of just like flipping a switch and then writing hundreds of books about why you shouldn't masturbate or something, I don't know, I haven't read it, the true god of the earth is the great fire beast Ormageddon. After the other inhabitants of the world turn on Ormageddon, instead of going down like a bitch, he instead self-destructs, leaving the remains of his metal body on the earth, and the fire within him becomes the very sun in the sky. Eventually, this gives rise to the Titans and the Coil. The Titans are man's ancestors, giant beings who conquered the entire world using technology created by the parts of Ormageddon that were left behind, before eventually ascending to godhood, but not before leaving instructions on how to use all the things that they had created. And remnants of the triumphs of these Goliaths litter the breadth of the Brütal lands. Snaking through the center of the entire map is a gigantic, dilapidated highway, and there are various schematics for ancient machines, and guitar tabs that teach you solos with magical effects.
These things really liven up a dull corner.
The landscape of the Brütal lands is blatantly inspired by the album art of metal bands like Manowar, who in turn were influenced by Norse mythology and pop culture at the time like Conan the Barbarian. This Viking-esque style is then mashed together with a late 80s industrial aesthetic, very clearly taken from bands like Motorhead, whose band mascot is the inspiration for Ormageddon the Fire Beast. The artists weren't trying to copy anyone specifically, but instead give a broad overview of the 80s metal subculture. But this isn't the only musical style being represented. One of the other factions, known as the Drowning Doom, are stand-ins for the goth/new romantics of the late 80s, with their Robert Smith hair, striped long-sleeve shirts, and Victorian dresses. The first obstacle in the game is General Lion White, a glamorous hair metal singer who leads the hair metal militia, and now tries to prove that humans can be both beautiful and profitable. This is in itself a tongue-in-cheek reference to the distaste that metal fans had towards the glam and goth subgenres, seeing them as being corporate sellouts or just whiny little fuckers. Oh, and did I mention that Lion White is voiced by Rob Halford of Judas Priest, and he's not the only real-life rocker on the cast. The main character, Eddie Riggs, is played by Jack Black, who got involved as the team started to realise that the character model they had designed for the player resembled him quite a bit. Black was apparently a huge fan of Tim Schafer's games and agreed to join. But once he was on board, word spread throughout the music scene of the project, and soon Lemmy Kilmister, Rob Halford, Lita Ford, and Ozzy fucking Osbourne all signed up to play characterized versions of themselves. They also managed to score Tim Curry for the voice of the Viculus, who once again proves that he's incapable of putting on a bad performance.
You know, you have your mother's eyes. And soon, so shall I. On a necklace, I think.
The use of real-life rock stars gives an extra layer to the satirical nature of the game, as many of the characters you meet are played by the very musicians that spawned the culture and aesthetic that the game is aping. The standouts of the voice talent are definitely Halford and Jack Black. Black may not come as much of a shock being a comedian and all, but Halford is actually a surprisingly competent voice actor.
I should have known better than to hire guards whose hands are bigger than their brains. You're all fired. Every fat, worthless one of you.
Lita Ford is a bit dry, and Lemmy hasn't sounded sober since the 70s, but Ozzy just sounds like himself, and that honestly works really well for him. He plays the fairly nonchalant guardian of metal, and is probably my favourite character in the game. Ozzy's insanely laid-back attitude works so well to undercut the legendary position that his character has in the mythos of the world.
Wait, what do I have to do for a fire tribute?
Please the fucking gods of metal, man. Figure it out.
Right, okay. I'll be back soon, covered in metal god love.
Oh, God.
But while you're cruising around in this heavy metal Valhalla, you're going to need some tunes to serve as the backdrop. And this game has a soundtrack that's so awesome, I'm pretty sure this video got copyright claimed as I was installing the game. Like, the synapses in my brain fired to give me the idea to cover Brütal Legend, and somewhere in LA, a shiver shot through Susan Wojcicki's spine. After you upgrade your hot rod with the Mouth of Metal, anytime you hop in the Deuce, you'll be greeted by a track from Anthrax, Dimmu Borgir, Def Leppard, Death Clock, Children of Bodom, King Diamond, Marilyn Manson, Racer X, Tenacious D, White Snake, and the list goes on and on. The game contains 107 licensed songs by 76 different artists, as well as a 40-minute original score. The playlist can even be adjusted in the menu, so you can pick and choose whichever songs you like best and then just cycle through those. The game is also quite frankly hilarious.
I told you not to climb on that, you stupid mother! Fucking piece of shit!
The stakes at play in the war against Diviculus are always pretty high, but all of the characters have this very unenthused, slacker demeanor that's played up for laughs.
What do you do with a bunch of kids who don't know how to do anything but bang their heads all day long?
You start a revolution, Lars. Right now!
If you're a fan of School of Rock or the Pick a Destiny, you'll immediately know what I mean. Having the voice talent of Jack Black and the wit of Tim Schafer together is something magical to behold, and these two really need to work together again. The humor is also woven into the world in how they manage to integrate aspects of rock music into the design of the game itself. One of the first things you have to do in the game is to recruit people into your army to fight the demons, and the factions that you acquire include headbangers, who have been enslaved and use their thick skulls and giant neck muscles to mine for rocks and ore, the roadies, who are masters at stealth because of their ability to not draw focus, and the Thunderhogs, motorcycle riding bass players whose tunes can heal you, and a few others including bouncers and groupies. It's obvious that this game was a total labour of love. The team took the time to craft this beautiful homage to 80s metal music, satirising the style, aesthetic and cultural tropes of the time, and weaving it into this ridiculous but entertaining fantasy setting that you'll have a hard time not loving. Whether you're a true rocker till you die, or you're just a fan of Jack Black's style of immature humour. And like I said, these are all the elements that I loved so much about this game, and the only ones that weren't washed away by the passages of time. So, why has my opinion changed on the game overall? Well, for that, we have to stage dive into the meat and evaluate the gameplay. After entering the Brütal lands, Eddie awakens on a sacrificial altar and quickly finds an axe that you can use to fight enemies in melee combat, and a guitar that you can use to set people on fire or hit them with lightning to stun them temporarily. You then find the schematics for the Deuce, a hot rod engine left behind by the Titans, and your first task is to escape the temple with the help of Ophelia, a member of the Ironhead Rebellion. You eventually make your way to the rebels' camp, where you're introduced to Lars, the leader of the rebels. Funny side note, Lars and his sister Lida's surname is Halford in reference to Rob Halford, but the actual Rob Halford voices Lion White, one of the antagonists. The characters were probably named before Halford's involvement was established. I just think it's kind of funny. After this meeting with the rebels, the map opens up and you're free to go and explore the expanse, with certain areas blocked off until later. The side missions in the game aren't all that interesting, usually just meeting up with a few members of the Resistance and fighting some demons or competing in races. Although these side quests aren't very fun, they usually have some hilarious interactions between Eddie and his motley crew of slackers.
My job is to deliver the beer from here down to the beach for the big party. But every time I try to walk some down there, it gets all warm.
You can still drink warm beer, you know.
No, I mean the sun. It gets all warm, and I have to stop under a tree and drink some beer, and, you know, it just goes so fast.
I'm starting to see the problem.
There's also the obligatory collectathon element to the game, with jumps to make in your car, relics that tell the backstory of the game, and these dragons which have been left in a compromising position. And as much as anybody likes being ball gagged and electrocuted, you should probably free them because you get special gifts from Ormagoden himself. The game world also has some very nice verticality to it, with large mountain ranges and cliffs, but the inability for Eddie to jump means that you almost always have to take the set path in many areas. Otherwise, you'll run into dead ends caused by small rock faces or walls that should really be climbable, and this can lead to a lot of frustration. Thankfully, Eddie's deuce can be summoned at any time by whipping out your guitar and laying down some sweet licks. But that's not all you can do with the raw power of riffage. Scattered throughout the land is Guitar Tab that teaches you other abilities, including a solo that melts the faces of lower level enemies instantly, or one that summons a flaming zeppelin that crashes to the ground doing massive damage. And if you don't understand those references, this game really isn't for you, you fucking po. The first few missions involve freeing the various types of humans from their servitude, and once they join you, you can perform a special double team move with them. The headbangers I mentioned before can be used to form a protective barrier around you that flattens almost anything in your path, or you can let one of the Razor Girls jump on your back and shotgun blast small clusters of enemies. And that's the game for the first 3 or so hours. You can strike your enemies, lock on, block, dodge, stun, use your guitar for special moves and AoE attacks, and use your double team abilities. And if you had been following the promotional material that was available at the time, or even consulted the game's box, you might be forgiven for thinking that this is the entire experience. So you've gathered up your generals and their masses, and it's finally time to take the fight to Lionwhite. But before you can leave, you have to repel an attack by the Hair Metal Militia. So, of course, Eddie does what he does best, and sets up a stage. You then find these geysers, these kind of ethereal looking vents in the ground that produce spectral music fans, and playing a certain riff on the guitar will construct a merch booth around them, allowing you to harvest the fans as a currency. You then use this currency to produce troops from your stage in order to attack the enemy stage, taking out their merch booths to stop them from making new units as you advance. And wait, Am I playing a fucking real-time strategy game right now? Multiple hours into this hack-and-slash adventure game, suddenly the developers have decided that all of that was just prep for the real content, this StarCraft-style RTS game. Halfway through the battle, Eddie sprouts wings, and you can use these wings to quickly navigate the battlefield. You control your armies in real time, commanding troops on where to attack and which positions to hold, but you still have all of your abilities, meaning that if a particular group of your buddies are getting hammered, you can land, summon the Hindenburg, melt some faces, and then fly off to wherever else you're needed. This is the kind of genre-defying ingenuity that Double Fine are known for. To keep this entire aspect of the game a secret for most players and even reviewers at the time was a bold move. Some may call this kind of advertisement misleading, but the devs decided it was important enough to keep it hidden until gamers experience it themselves and have it come out of left field. However, this was always going to be divisive, and it didn't really help that the real-time strategy mechanics weren't very good. Like with a lot of strategy games, there's a rock, paper, scissors element to unit creation, with certain units being better at fighting a particular enemy troop, but being weak to another one. For example, the headbangers and roadies are great for destroying structures, while the bouncers excel at getting rid of vehicles, and a single fire beast can take out waves of enemy cannon fodder. You can even do your double team abilities if you feel like the AI isn't doing a good job prioritizing targets, although it's usually okay for the most part. The real problem comes from how you interact with your troops once on the field. You can give 3 basic commands: follow me, go there and kill stuff, or stay here until I fucking say so. And any of your troops in your immediate area will follow those commands. But there's no way to give commands to specific troops. Do you want your infantry to head in first and clear a path for your more fragile roadies so they can deal massive damage to the enemy stage? It's going to require a bit of planning in terms of what order you make your units in. But once the first objective is complete, all of your troops are now clustered together, and separating them is basically impossible. Also, for the first few battles, you have to continuously make your way back to your stage and give orders to newly made troops, although later you get the ability to set up a rallying flag that all new troops will make their way to. One other small contention I had with the game was that the AI doesn't really play fairly. Instead of this being a straight up challenge where you and the computer have to gather resources and pump out troops, the AI starts with a small number and spawns more in clusters as you advance on the field or complete objectives. This usually meant that my first attempt at each battle would go really poorly, as I'd lose a large number of my men to take out like an enemy merch booth, only for the AI to spawn a large number of troops and swing the battle. This made trying to control my opponent's resources entirely useless mechanically. It also meant the second attempt at each battle was far too easy, as I learned to first take out my opponent's troops, then rebuild my forces with the troops I needed to combat the next wave, complete the objective, and then just steamroll the enemy as I knew what to expect. Now, that's not to say that you can't find any enjoyment in the strategy elements, but it seems like the devs kind of backed themselves into a corner. This is an incredibly unique take on the real-time strategy genre, but having it be a secret meant that the devs had a choice to make. Build a really complex strategy game and risk pissing off the people who weren't expecting it, or make the mechanics so bare bones that even the adventure players who bought the game thinking it was going to be, you know, super happy fun time hack and slash game could still enjoy it. The result is that neither of these are really satisfied, and the simplicity of the mechanics is actually frustrating, especially the inability to micromanage distinct groups of units. RTS games aren't complicated just for the sake of it. A lot of their complexity is a natural consequence of the design of the games themselves. There's been tons of attempts to make RTS games that aren't so mechanically convoluted, you know, to appeal to more casual players, but this isn't one of the better ones. The game also has a multiplayer mode where you can take control of one of the 4 major factions in the game and duke it out with the RTS mechanics, but unfortunately the servers were dead anytime I tried to log on. It seems that each faction just has reskinned variations of the same units, so hey, you know, at least it's probably balanced. Whether the devs thought that the RTS elements were strong enough for a multiplayer scene to grow, or it was their EA overlords that wanted it in the game, is a mystery. Although I couldn't play the multiplayer mode, I'm going to take an educated guess here and assume that it probably wasn't that great. The mix of fairly average 3D hack and slash gameplay and frustrating RTS sections unfortunately drags this game down. The fact that they even tried to blend these two together and keep it a secret from promotional material is a pretty ballsy move, but it also makes the fact that they didn't manage to pull it off all the more bitter. It seems that the 3 distinct parts of this game, the open world, the hack and slash gameplay, and the RTS mechanics, all suffered from the inclusion of the other 2. As it always seems to go, the higher the ambition, the further you have to fall. I'm a bit saddened at the realization that this game wasn't what I remembered, and it was around the 2nd or 3rd large-scale battle when memories of the poorly designed RTS sections began to come flooding back to my mind. So, what did my janky memories leave out, and why did the parts I remember stick out above everything else? So the first thing to think about is what's different, and the first thing that's different is me. I'm fucking getting old now, and when I first played Brütal Legend, I was a massive heavy metal fan from Judas Priest to Bring Me the Horizon. It was that stage in your life where your musical taste played a huge part in defining who you were, how you dressed, and who you associated with. My brain was geared towards the meta humor and immaturity, stuff that this game has in spades. I also remember exploring the world a hell of a lot more. I spent a week getting about 15 hours of gameplay under my belt for the review, but I'm certain I played the game for at least 3 times as long during the week that I initially rented it. Probably because I was 15 and I had nothing to fucking do all day but play video games and guitar. Funnily enough though, there's a parallel between my rose-tinted view of the game and the nostalgia expressed within the game. Just as I wish I could go back to those halcyon days where playing a game with subpar gameplay wasn't that big of an investment of my time, the characters in Brütal Legend all wish for the perceived glory of the past to be brought back. At the beginning, Eddie laments the commercialization of modern music with the old adage,
You ever feel like you were born in the wrong time? Like you should have been born earlier? When the music was real?
Like the 70s?
Earlier. Like the early 70s.
The Coil are trying to figure out how to use the power and machines that the Titans left behind, and considering the Titans look identical to your average metal fan, this is clearly an analogy for returning to the time when the music was good. This is also reinforced by the inclusion of real rock and metal royalty. And finally, Eddie being transported back in time only to find the world overrun by demons is a reminder not to idolize the past. It has all the cool things that you remember, but there's also parts that you're better off leaving lost to time. So basically, Brütal Legend, the game, is the ultimate meta-commentary on my own personal experience with the game, Brütal Legend. As with all the games on the Steam pilgrimage, we need to talk about how this game ended up on the backlog. And I think this was one of those hazy late-night Steam sale affairs, you know, the kind that make it hard to look yourself in the eye the next morning, like you know you're never going to find time to play this, you piece of shit. Before playing the game for this review, I loaded the save file from the only time I booted up the game and found that I stopped playing right after getting the car radio. I was on a heavy nostalgia trip and knew exactly what I wanted from the game, to cruise around and listen to the game's soundtrack. And I almost recommend it just for that reason, as long as you know what you're getting into, something the people who originally bought the game couldn't do. Like the denizens of the Brütal lands who wish to go back to a time that they perceive as being better in the past, I wish to go back to a time in my past when I still thought the Brütal Legend was a good game. But unfortunately, once you go digging into the past and uncover the truth of it, there is no going back. Unless I somehow forget again about all the problems with Brütal Legend and making this video and writing the script. No, I think my view of the game has been sullied now. But what do you think? Are you a fan of Brütal Legend, or are you someone like me who has been slightly disappointed by the realization that the game didn't quite live up to your memories of it? Let me know down in the comments. Or, as always, after one of these videos, I'm going to be opening up a new channel on my Discord server, the link to which you can find down in the description, where we can just talk about Brütal Legend, or maybe just talk about heavy metal music in general. Come on down, we'll have a little chat, and we can discuss what you thought about the game. And that brings us to the end of another chapter in the Steam Pilgrimage. If you've made it this far into the video, then I appreciate you more than you could ever know. Thanks for watching, and keep hacking away at that backlog.